In the endless prairies of Illinois, far from the hustle and bustle of Chicago, lies a tiny village that hardly anyone can find on a map. This patch of land is called Beeson, where barely 200 souls live. Here, everyone knows everyone. People greet each other on the street, and they leave their front doors unlocked at night. It's a world that seems frozen in time, peaceful, conservative, surrounded by farmland. The residents tend their front gardens with dedication, attend church together on Sundays, and look after their neighbors' children as if they were their own. In such communities, there is a deep sense of trust. People firmly believe that evil only exists in the big cities, where anonymity and crime go hand in hand. But this illusion is deceptive. Sometimes horror doesn't lurk in the dark alleys of foreign metropolises, but right next door, behind familiar faces and friendly smiles. The story that unfolded in Beeson in the fall of 2009 was set to change this small community forever and prove that no community is immune to evil. Raymond Geese, known to everyone as Rick, was a man who worked with his hands. His life was marked by hard work and an unyielding will to provide a better life for his family. As a young man, he had toiled at his stepfather's construction company, saved money, and held on to every cent. His biological father was killed in the Vietnam War when Rick was just 5 years old. This early experience of loss had shaped him, turning him into a man who put his family above everything else. In time, he was able to afford his own property on the edge of town, a ranch house with a garage, a swimming pool, and plenty of land where he even kept chickens. To pay off the mortgage, Rick rented a room to a young mother named Ruth Ann Constant, who urgently needed a home for herself and her 2 small children. Ruth was a warm-hearted, lively woman with a laugh that could light up a room. The attraction between the two was unmistakable. Rick was generous and reliable, Ruth was loving and caring. They married in 1997, uniting their families and starting a life together. At this point, Rick's daughter Nicole was already 15, and Ruth's children were still young. Soon, more children followed. Austin, then Jessica Lynn, who sadly was born with severe health issues and had to be cared for in a specialized facility. And finally, little Tabitha. The Geese family grew and grew. The house filled with children's laughter, with toys in the yard, with the everyday challenges of a large family. Rick worked tirelessly to support them all, while Ruth stayed home and cared for the children. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. The children were polite and well-behaved, waiting for the school bus in front of the post office every morning. The postmistress knew them all by name, watching them grow bigger year after year. Dylan, Ruth's older son, particularly stood out. An energetic boy who sometimes didn't know what to do with his boundless energy. Teachers wrote disciplinary reports, but at his core, he was a good boy who loved his little siblings and competed on the school wrestling team. Nicole, Rick's eldest daughter, fell in love with a young man from town, Christopher Harris. The youthful romance became serious. The two married young and moved into their own house, just a few minutes' walk from the Geese farm. Soon, Nicole became a mother. Rick and Ruth were overjoyed to be grandparents. Christopher worked as a chef and studied architecture on the side. From the outside, everything was as it should be. A typical American family in a typical American small town. No one suspected that beneath this peaceful surface, a tragedy was brewing, so appalling that even experienced investigators would struggle to find the words to describe it. September 21st, 2009 began like any other autumn day in Beeson. The air was clear and cool, and the trees already bore the first colors of fall. Children played outside after school, adults went about their daily chores. A 10-year-old boy swung onto his brand-new bicycle, excited and proud to show it to his friends Austin and Dylan. He pedaled hard, racing through the quiet streets of Beeson toward the Geese property. As he reached the porch, he froze. Something was wrong. The front door was ajar, which was unusual. But that wasn't the worst of it. The entire porch was covered in a dark, sticky liquid. Blood. Blood everywhere. The child stood paralyzed, his heart pounding in his chest. He called out for his friends, his voice trembling with fear. No answer, just silence. A heavy, unnatural silence that weighed more heavily than any sound. The boy instinctively knew he couldn't go in alone. Panic gripped him. He jumped back on his bicycle and raced away as fast as his legs could carry him. A few blocks away, Nicole lived with her husband Christopher and their children. Rick's stepfather, William, whom everyone called Fat Man, and cousin Adam were there, laying new carpets. The boy burst in, his face chalk white, unable to form coherent sentences. He stammered something about blood, the Geese farm, that something terrible must have happened. The men immediately grasped the seriousness of the situation. They dropped everything, jumped in the car, and raced to Rick's house. Adam was the first to reach the porch. He saw the blood. A knife lay on the bottom steps. Fat Man tried to calm himself, murmuring that the family kept chickens. Maybe they had butchered one. But the amount of blood told a different story. Adam cautiously entered the house. It was dark, all the curtains drawn. He fumbled for the light switch, his hand shaking. When the light came on, a nightmare was revealed. In the hallway, in a huge pool of blood, lay Raymond Rick Geese, face down. His head was shattered, his body motionless. Adam couldn't go on. He turned and ran outside, screaming for Fat Man to call 911 immediately. Just then, Nicole drove up. She had wondered where her grandfather and cousin had disappeared to in such a hurry. When she saw the men's faces, she knew something terrible had happened. She pleaded with her grandfather to tell her if her family was okay. But Fat Man couldn't answer. He didn't know himself. Nicole insisted that someone had to go in and check on her siblings. Fat Man, though internally breaking, forced himself back inside. What he saw exceeded all imagination. Blood wasn't just under Rick's body. It was everywhere, on the walls, the ceiling, in every corner. It looked like a horror movie, except this was reality. His knees buckled. Adam had to forcibly pull him outside. 12 minutes after the emergency call, the police arrived. The officers entered the house with drawn weapons, completely unprepared for what awaited them. They found Rick first, then Dylan in the hallway outside the master bedroom, huddled, with even worse injuries. The walls were marked with impacts, as if someone had slammed their fists into them. In the bedroom lay Ruth, her injuries so gruesome that even seasoned investigators had to look away. In the bathroom, they found Austin and Justina in the bedroom. All dead, all killed in a brutal manner. Then in the closet of another room, they discovered something they hadn't expected. Little Tabitha was still moving. The 3-year-old girl was alive. It was a miracle in the midst of this hell. The crime scene investigators faced a task that challenged even their decades of experience. The Geese house wasn't just a crime scene. It was a scene of unparalleled violence that had coated every detail of the house with death and destruction. 6 people had been attacked here, 5 of them fatally. The sheer amount of blood made it impossible to move without contaminating evidence. Every step had to be documented, every surface examined. The medical examiner arrived and began the gruesome work of examining the bodies. What he found shocked even him. Rick had suffered 39 blunt force traumas, 13 of them to the head. Ruth had 28 blow wounds. Her skull was indented. 11-year-old Austin had 21 identifiable injuries. His skull was fractured on both sides, and there was evidence that someone had stepped on his face. Justina's skull was completely destroyed in the upper region. But Dylan, 14-year-old Dylan, had suffered over 100 injuries, 52 of them to the head and upper body. The brutality was incomprehensible. Investigators determined that the victims had not been killed with firearms, as initially suspected. It was blunt force trauma, inflicted again and again until the life had left them. This meant the perpetrator was up close, directly confronting each victim. This was personal, driven by hate. Forensics found a bloody handprint on the bathroom counter, a crucial piece of evidence. Outside in the mud, they discovered a clear shoe print belonging to a known sneaker brand. The police asked the public for help. They urged people to report anyone with unexplained injuries, cuts, bruises, abrasions. In this type of crime, the perpetrator must have been injured themselves. They also checked all hospitals within a 300-kilometer radius, but without success. A neighbor mentioned seeing an unknown silver or grey pickup truck with unusual exhaust pipes driving toward the Gee's house after midnight. This information was immediately passed on. While little Tabitha fought for her life in the hospital, investigators worked day and night. They questioned everyone who knew the family. Ruth's best friend recounted that she had been chatting late with Ruth and Rick on Sunday evening. The woman was hard of hearing and preferred to communicate in writing. The last messages were sent around 10:04 p.m. After that, there was no reply. At 1:45 a.m., the friend had jokingly asked, "Are you still alive?" A question that, in retrospect, seemed like a cruel joke. The police also investigated the possibility that it had been a robbery. A computer was missing from the house. But the violence was far too excessive for a simple theft. This had to have another motive. Investigators created profiles, checked alibis, and searched for motives. Beeson was in turmoil. People locked their doors at night, suddenly mistrusting their neighbors. The safety they had felt their entire lives was shattered in a single night. Nicole sat by her little sister's hospital bed, unable to comprehend what had happened. Her husband Christopher stayed by her side, comforting her, organizing the funeral. He seemed like the perfect husband in this time of need. But the investigators left no stone unturned. They questioned Christopher and Nicole, as is customary in such cases. Both had alibis. Christopher had been at a bar with his brother Jason. Nothing initially pointed to their involvement. On September 30th, 9 days after the massacre, something inconspicuous happened that would bring a turning point to the case. Nicole and Christopher were leaving Tabitha's hospital room when an observant police officer noticed something. Christopher was wearing sneakers of a specific brand, the exact brand whose print had been found at the crime scene. At first, this seemed insignificant. After all, it was a common brand, but the officer reported it anyway. Investigators began to dig deeper into Christopher's background. What they found was interesting. He had a history of minor offenses: shoplifting, bounce checks, marijuana possession. All of it was about 10 years old, but it showed a pattern. They also came across Nicole and Christopher's divorce file from 2006. The reason cited was physical cruelty. But they had later gotten back together and had another child. Was Christopher violent? He was called in for questioning again and asked for his sneakers for examination. Christopher agreed without hesitation. While his truck was parked outside, officers inspected the vehicle. It was a light grey pickup, similar to the one the neighbor had seen. However, the unusual chrome exhaust pipes were missing. Investigators knew, though, that such pipes could be easily removed. Christopher willingly provided his fingerprints and handprints. The sneakers matched the brand, but were a half size larger than the print at the crime scene. Furthermore, they were clean, with no traces of blood or mud. To completely rule Christopher out, investigators requested permission to search his home and vehicle. He immediately agreed. No search warrants needed. What the police found next raised alarm bells. Under a tarp in the bed of the truck was the missing Gee's family computer. In the backyard of Christopher's brother Jason's house, they discovered a chrome barbell, which, when placed on the truck bed, could look like chrome exhaust pipes from a distance. And near a creek, they found a crowbar. Too many coincidences. But the investigators needed irrefutable proof. And then it came. After thorough analysis, the bloody handprint found in the Geese house was determined to belong to Christopher Harris. He had been there, on the night of the murders. There was no other explanation. In early October, Christopher Harris was arrested and charged with 5 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. The town was shocked. Many refused to believe that a man who was practically family could do such a thing. Nicole publicly defended her husband. She posted on social media that Christopher was innocent, that her children had not only lost 5 family members, but now their father was also being wrongly accused. She argued that all 6 victims had fought for their lives. Why then did Christopher have no cuts or bruises? His family joined in his defense. His father told reporters that Christopher was sitting in his cell, crying and swearing he was innocent. But the evidence mounted. Investigators seized Christopher's truck on October 2nd. It turned out the vehicle actually belonged to Jennifer Ernest, his brother Jason's girlfriend, where Christopher was staying at the time. Jennifer and her mother Sarah had both given the brothers alibis for the night of the murders, but now that the truth was coming out, they were also arrested for obstruction of justice. The pressure on Jason Harris mounted. The charge against him was escalated to aid to a crime in the 1st degree. He faced a choice: remain silent and potentially face life in prison, or tell the truth and negotiate a deal. The human survival instinct won. Jason started talking. Jason Harris's testimony revealed a story even more terrifying than anything the investigators had imagined. It started with alcohol and drugs. That night, Christopher and Jason had been partying hard, drinking and consuming cocaine. In their intoxicated state, they longed for female company. When the women within their reach rejected them, Christopher came up with an idea, a terrible, perverse idea. He wanted to drive to the Geese farm and force 16-year-old Justina into sexual acts. In his clouded mind, he believed the girl had been flirting with him, that she showed interest. Jason claimed he hadn't known what would happen in the house, that he had waited in the car. Christopher went to the front door with the crowbar. Rick opened it, and apparently the conversation didn't go as Christopher had hoped. Then Jason heard blows and screams from the house. Suddenly, a figure flew through Justina's bedroom window. It was Dylan. The boy stood up, ran to the driveway and called for Jason's help, but Jason remained paralyzed in the car, unable to move. Instead of fleeing, Dylan did the unthinkable. He went back into the house to protect his sister. Shortly after, the teenager stumbled out of the house again, this time bleeding, and ran into the backyard. Christopher pursued him with the crowbar. The boy screamed for him to stop, but Christopher caught him and struck him again and again. Then Christopher went back inside the house. Dylan, severely injured and bleeding, got up again. He went back in one last time to save his family. A 14-year-old boy who sacrificed his own life to protect the people he loved. After the massacre, Christopher came out of the house, holding the crowbar and the family computer. He feared the webcam had recorded his actions. He wanted to leave no witnesses. As the brothers drove away, Christopher threw his blood-soaked sneakers out the window, along with the crowbar. Later, he forced Jason to burn his clothes. The next day, Christopher bought a new pair of sneakers, a half-size larger. With Jason's help, investigators found the bloody shoes in a ditch. In exchange for his testimony against Christopher, Jason received a reduced sentence. But Christopher had his own version of events. He claimed he went to the Geese farm, hoping Rick had marijuana. He went inside and found Rick injured on the floor, then Ruth in the bedroom. When he turned around, Dylan was standing behind him with a knife, anger in his eyes. According to Christopher's account, Dylan had killed his family, and Christopher had to stop the teenager in self-defense. He hadn't wanted anyone to find out what Dylan had done, to protect the family's reputation. To support this defense, Christopher's lawyers presented Dylan's disciplinary record, over 250 incidents in 3 years. They argued the boy was violent, came from a dysfunctional family, was addicted to video games, and had become aggressive due to ADHD medication. But when Dylan's teachers testified in court, they painted a completely different picture. They described an energetic but fundamentally loving boy. His disciplinary violations were minimal. Talking in class, dropping a pen. It only took a few words to calm him down. Teachers recounted how gently Dylan treated his little sister Tabitha, how hard he trained in wrestling. He may not have had the strength of a champion, but he had an unbeatable spirit. The jury had to decide whom should they believe. The trial against Christopher Harris lasted a month and a half and was one of the most complex cases Logan County had ever seen. The jurors had to wade through a mountain of evidence, evaluate conflicting testimonies, and discern the line between truth and desperate lies. On one side was the defense, attempting to turn a dead 14-year-old boy into a murderer. On the other were the irrefutable forensic evidence and the testimony of Christopher's own brother. Then came the crucial moment. A former cellmate of Christopher's took the stand and reported that Christopher had confessed the truth to him, an even more gruesome version than anything heard before. Christopher had come to the Geese farm, and when Rick refused to let him see his daughter, he had attacked him with the crowbar. Ruth came to see what was going on and also became a victim of his rage. Dylan tried to defend his mother, but was overpowered. Christopher told his cellmate his only regret was that he hadn't burned the house down. Then no one would have ever found out what he had done. On May 31, 2013, the jury delivered its verdict. Guilty on all counts. Christopher Harris was convicted of 5 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder of Tabitha, home invasion, and robbery. On July 19, 2013, the sentence was pronounced. 5 consecutive life sentences, plus 30 years for the attempted murder of Tabitha, plus 30 years for home invasion, plus 20 years for robbery. Christopher Harris would never be a free man again. At the sentencing, Christopher spoke one last time. He insisted he was innocent, that he had made many foolish decisions that night but was not a murderer. Nicole, who had believed in his innocence for so long, could no longer resist the burden of evidence. The truth was too overwhelming. Jason Harris, who testified against his brother, received a sentence of 10 years probation for obstruction of justice and illegal drug possession. Many wondered if this sentence was appropriate for someone who stood idly by while a family was slaughtered. But what happened to little Tabitha, the 3-year-old girl who lay with severe head injuries in a dark closet for 14 hours, survived against all odds? 2 police officers who guarded her hospital room became her playmates and protectors. They read to her, played board games with her, and painted her toenails to make her feel pretty despite everything. They even organized a birthday party for her in the hospital. After several operations, Tabitha recovered completely. The miracle was that her head injuries took away her memories of that terrible night, a cruel, yet perhaps merciful, twist of fate. Tabitha was taken in and raised by her older sister, Nicole. A playground was built in Beeson in honor of Justina, Austin, and Dylan, with a memorial stone and plaque. The town tried to heal, but the scars remained. In 2014, the Geese house was intentionally burned down by the fire department, with permission from the Environmental Protection Agency to erase the physical memory of the horror. Yet a controversy remained. In 2014, a true crime series aired an episode about the Geese family that portrayed Dylan as a violent, disturbed teenager. Investigators who had worked on the case wrote an open letter denouncing the dishonesty of the broadcast. They emphasized that Dylan was a hero, a boy who gave his life to save his family. He could have fled when he was thrown out the window, but he went back, again and again. This was not a story about a perpetrator, but about a hero. Christopher Harris tried several times to get his case reopened, in 2013 just before sentencing, and in 2019 before the Illinois Court of Appeals. All motions were denied. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars. The story of the Gies family reminds us that evil doesn't always come from strangers, but sometimes from those we let into our lives. It also reminds us that even in the darkest moments, heroism exists, in the form of a 14-year-old boy who refused to abandon his family even when it cost him his life.